this tradition of public land ownership is like almost uniquely American and makes us America. That's what, in my mind, it's one of the cornerstones of our country.
I mean, like, if you consider yourself a patriot, like a red-blooded American, this is
Yeah.
about as true American as it gets. Like, it really was an idea that we started here and that has been exported to other places, but everyone looks at us as like the envy of the world when it comes to the public land system we have and everything it supports. So much of what also makes America unique and our culture unique is a little bit of that frontier culture, the whittling, the sharpening of the axe that we achieved as a people as we spread across this nation. And we were smart enough to preserve some of that. We preserved some of those wild places that made us who we are, because I think we as a people realize that if we lost that, who are we?
Welcome to the Just Hunt podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Just Hunt podcast, episode 23. And today we have a pretty important one, and we have Mark Kenyon. Would you say you're from Meat Eater, Wired to Hunt, author? How would you introduce yourself, I guess? What's the main
above.
focus? All of the above?
Yeah, it's just as confusing for me.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say I am an author. I am the host of the Wired to Hunt podcast and member of the Meat Eater crew. So I host a bunch of our various TV shows / films there at Meat Eater and do a whole bunch of stuff there. So yeah, I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and I think maybe, why we reached out is probably most importantly right now is you've been a big advocate of public lands and conserving those lands and keeping them public. And I think that's something you've been at the front of for a while now, but now it's more important than ever. So we thought there's probably not a better person. There's a couple other guys out there that have been really good advocates as well and pretty vocal over the last few months, but I think you're one of the best ones. What we want to talk about is, I guess is it a budget reconciliation bill is basically what you'd say. And there's a lot of stuff in that bill, and a lot of these big bills in Washington have a ton of stuff in them. And we probably should be, in general as individuals, I know myself, more interested in everything in the bill. But there is one thing that is sportsmen, outdoorsmen, conservationists that we really should be concerned about. And so we want to talk to you today about that, Mark. I know you know kind of the ins and outs of it better than most. And more importantly, probably most of the people that listen to this podcast are from the Northeast. And, the public lands that are directly affected by this bill are in the West. I think all of in the West. Is that correct?
Well, it is now. As of just 2 days ago, it was including national forest lands that would have been places like, the White Mountain National Forest,
Right.
Green Mountain National Forest, places that I think a lot of your listeners have poked around. So, so yes, that at this very moment, because of some changes that were made over the last couple days, because of opposition from people like us, things have changed a little, but it's still something that is worth talking about and still considering.
Yeah, and we can get into a little more, but just because it's out west now, that doesn't mean that's where it's going to stay and end. And I think that's probably the biggest issue here is we don't want to send, not 1 acres, right, the moniker we're using right now, but say that we lose 1 acre or 10,000 acres or 50,000 acres. Well, over time that can balloon, that's going to creep, and it's a slippery slope, as they say, and that can turn into a lot more. And all of a sudden, the face of the outdoors in the U.S. looks way different than it ever did. So, do you want to talk a little bit about? Were you in Washington recently too, Mark? I thought I saw. Can you tell us about your involvement in this bill and maybe the stuff that hit on the key points that people may not realize?
Yeah. So I'll rewind the tape just a little bit to give folks some context as to why I've gotten involved in this, and then I'll give some background on the bill and then where we're at now. So as you mentioned, I've been speaking out on this a lot, and that has been mostly because I spent a whole bunch of years of my life studying the history of our public land system. You mentioned, I've written books. My first book was called That Wild Country, and it was all about the history of our public land system. How we got these places, what's the status of them now, and what's coming down the pipeline in the future. That was the main theme of that book. So I spent a lot of time digging into the details of this, the details of how we got these places, why we have these places, who was involved, the interesting thing that stood out to me throughout that entire process is that since day one, there have been people and entities and organizations trying to tear down our public lands, right? So this is not new, what we're experiencing now. There has been some version of this decade after decade after decade since the early 1900s. So in one way of looking at things, that can be discouraging. On the flip side, it can also be encouraging when you look at the fact that despite more than 100 years of people trying to tear this thing down, people have always stood up and fought back, and we've been able to hold the line mostly. So I wrote this book deeply engaged in understanding these issues and trying to be a useful advocate for them because, my life revolves around these places. I'm, a diehard deer hunter. I grew up hunting on public land. It was state land in this case, but nearby a national forest. So from an early age, I was kind of indoctrinated into hunting and fishing. And then as I became an adult, I started traveling across wider parts of the country and experiencing everything there is to really see: hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, backpacking, the whole 9 yards. And now to this day, that's really like the sun that my family's world kind of revolves around is wild places, public lands. So for those two reasons: one, having this deep kind of professional experience and interest, and two, this being like the linchpin of my family's life. For all those reasons, I've really felt like a deep personal connection to making sure that we have these places and wildlife and the opportunities to go out there and experience in them. So, for years now, I've been exploring how I could be more effective and ways I can get involved, being on various, conservation organization board of directors and various projects. But this spring, an opportunity did arise to join a crew heading to Washington, D.C., to meet with a variety of different lawmakers. And so I was able to meet with, I think, 8 different offices, some representatives, some senators. And that was a great chance just to, do a couple things. One being, reminding these folks of how important public lands are to hunters and anglers and outdoors people. And then just more broadly, remind these folks that, wildlife, wild places, clean air, clean water, the stuff that we need to be able to hunt and fish and enjoy ourselves out there and to have a healthy world around us, that's not a partisan thing. Like, it's not like that only Republicans care about that and only Democrats don't, or vice versa. I don't care if you're D or R. This is stuff that you should be sticking up for. And I want to make sure that whether I was speaking to a Republican or a Democrat, that I reminded them of that. And so those are the kinds of conversations we had, sharing with them specifics as far as like, hey, here's a bill that I know you support. We applaud you for that. Or here's something that we're a little bit concerned about your position on. The hunting and angling community would love it if you would reconsider or think about this different perspective. So those are the kinds of chats we were having. And all kind of within the the context of some of the ideas that have been floated over the last 4 to 6 months, which there's a bunch of stuff that is relevant to hunting and fishing and public lands and wild places. And so that's what we were doing there. Shortly after coming back from that trip is when this whole budget reconciliation process kicked off. And there's a bunch of fancy terminology that you're hearing on TV and everywhere, but the basic gist of it is that there is a way that Congress can dub a bill as a reconciliation bill that basically says, like, hey, if this is related to budget, to revenues and expenses, you can make this bill go through a different process than the typical bill. The typical bill is going to require a supermajority, which means like 60 senators.
Yep.
With a reconciliation bill, you can pass this thing with a simple 51 vote majority.
Yep.
And so that's, that makes it much easier to pass this bill than your typical thing. So because of that, what ends up happening, and this has happened for a number of decades now, there's a whole bunch of things that can't get passed on a 51 to 49 vote or whatever, right? That's tough to get these days. So what everyone does is they have their little pet issues and their pet bills, or the thing they've tried to get passed and couldn't get passed. And when this reconciliation process begins, everyone puts in their pet bill or puts in their pet priority or puts in their whatever, and it becomes this monster bill that, in the case of this, it covers everything from tax breaks to housing to public lands to environmental review to Lord knows what else. I mean, it's a behemoth. And stuff because of that gets lost in the noise.
Yeah.
And so something that maybe would usually require a big debate and people would want to talk about and there's a whole bunch of, focus on it can just disappear. And so that's how this stuff gets passed sometimes. In this case, fortunately, there's people paying attention and they noticed right out the gate that there's a bunch of stuff in this bill that pertains to, the conservation of wildlife and wild places. A handful of those things have been stripped out. A handful of those things are still in here today. And the big one that's really like the easy one to very clearly understand and want to take action on is this sale of public lands. So, and cut me off if at any point I'm being too long.
No, this is great. Keep going. I have questions and I want to ask you, but you're doing a great job so far. So keep down that road.
All right. So this whole process starts in the House of Representatives, and it really, really begins in a committee of the House of Representatives. So the way these bills get made is like there'll be these little subcommittees that are like issue based. And so there's like a House Natural Resources Committee where there's like 20 different representatives that sit in this committee, and then they discuss and debate whatever's going to be in the natural resources part of this big, huge bill. And so way back in, I don't know, April maybe this started or early May. It's all kind of a blur now. But this all kind of came into the public sphere when the House Natural Resources Committee basically put together a piece of their bill and passed through the committee something that called for what eventually became, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million plus acres of public lands would be mandated to be sold. So back in late April or May, that came out, and that caused a huge outcry from the outdoor community once we found out that this was going to happen. And there were two really important things to remember about why that was important. One was that there's just this forced sale of public lands.
Yeah.
And two, it was the process in place. So in the House version of the bill, they were just proposing a sale of public lands in Utah and Nevada. So it seemed like limited in scope, right? So why would somebody from Michigan or Maine or New Hampshire care?
Right.
But the issue was this was a new process for disposing of public lands. And it would set a precedent. You mentioned slippery slope. It would set a precedent that's really dangerous. Right now, there is a process in place for disposal or swaps or sales of public land when appropriate in kind of small ways. So, for example, in the past, there might be like a 40-acre section of BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, federally public land. Yep. And maybe that's been developed all around it. And so there's like a neighborhood around it, or there's industrial complexes around it or something. So now there's this random little piece of 40-acre desert, and it's not being utilized. Maybe it's not even accessible by the public. And so in cases like that, this process was put in place through, I think it's FLPMA, the Federal Land Management Policy, or something along those lines, all these acronyms. But this process was put in place that would say, okay, when there's a unique, appropriate situation like this, where the public is not being served by their public lands, we will put in a careful process for reviewing that, determining if there's an appropriate place, allowing the public to review this and comment on it. And then if we can sell that small piece, those funds are put into a fund that is utilized only for the future acquisition or management of public lands. So it's like, hey, we will only do this if it will serve the greater public good and public land in the future. So that's been how this stuff has been how this has happened in the past.
Well, it sounds like in that instance, say you do have a 40 in the middle of, it's really valuable real estate for development, right? And it's not being utilized. Maybe you sell 40 acres for $2 million, then you go buy 1,000 acres for $2 million somewhere else. And I think most people would say, hey, that's a great trade-off. We're all for that. But it doesn't sound like this is what that is at all. So, yeah.
Exactly. So the problem with this, with the House version, and I'll get to the Senate, which is where we are right now, but I just want to give a little history here. The House version said, we're not going to go by that old law anymore. We're not going to go through that process anymore. We're not going to do any of those things. Instead, we're just going to force the sale. It's going to happen in a very short period of time. There's going to be no public review. There's going to be no public comment. There's going to be none of the normal review processes that have been put in place to make sure this is appropriate and carefully done. And best of all, none of the funds go back to future public lands or public acquisition. It's just going to go to the general treasury to disappear into oblivion, to go to fund whatever thing. So that's why, in late April or early May, there was a pretty big outcry from the outdoor community around this. And it led to folks like Montana's Representative Ryan Zinke saying, hey, I'm not going to stand for this. This is a bad idea. We got to scrap this. And eventually there was enough pushback that they pulled it. They pulled it from the House version of the bill. And we all cheered and were excited, and we beat this, this really bad public land idea. We won the battle. But fast forward a couple weeks later, and now this one big beautiful bill goes to the Senate, and they get to go through and kind of make their own version. So they take what the House did, and they tack on all of their fun things. And Senator Mike Lee out of Utah, he is the chair of the Senate version of this committee that we talked about. It's like the Senate Energy and something Resources Committee. I can't remember the full name there, but same general thing. And he is the chair of that committee, so he kind of runs it. And he, without any input from the rest of the committee or any debate, usually there has to be like some discussion stuff. Instead, he just dropped his thing on here. It's like, hey, here's my thing. And his thing was what everyone's been talking about over the last couple of weeks, which is another mandated sale. But instead of just Utah and Nevada, this was a mandated sale of public lands across 11 different western states. And this would be 11 different western states, and not just BLM lands, but also U.S. Forest Service lands. Now, we talked earlier about how this doesn't pertain to the Northeast as much. In this case, like these Forest Service lands right now were from western states. But again, back to the precedent. This is the same deal. It would bypass the usual process. It would not in any way have public review, public comment, and the funding from these sales would not go to future public land stuff. So the big fear is if this happens and we have this 2 million acres or 3 million acres of public land sold off in this manner, it then becomes a fast track for anyone else to do this in the future when they've got the votes and when they have something they want to fund, whether it's, who cares what it is. If someone wants to make some money within the government for their pet project or for whatever reason, here's a great way to do it. Because we have 640 million acres of federally public lands across the nation. That's worth a lot of money. And for someone who doesn't care about the public lands for the many uses and values they provide right now, and instead just sees, dollars and change, that's a very tempting asset. So that is why over the last 2 weeks, folks have gotten even louder than they were last time around. I think we have seen a wider distribution of both awareness and outcry on this. And it's, for lack of a better term, really went viral within the, not just the hunting and fishing community, but like definitely our community, but then also like the REI outdoor community, even more like traditional public land users, like the ranching community is even now starting to get concerned, because some of these places were places they had grazing leases and they utilize these landscapes for their reasons. So it's pretty widespread now, the outcry, which has led us to what happened 2 days ago, which is that, Senator Mike Lee, again, he's a senator from Utah, and I should take one more step back here and mention that this is not like a new one-off thing for him. He has been trying for years and years and years to sell off or transfer or get rid of our public lands. He's been the most anti-public land senator we've had in the last decade for sure.
Do you have any, and I know it's tough to assign motive and assume things. I know you probably don't want to, but do you, from a personal opinion, I guess, do you know what what do you think his motivation is? Because to me, I think that the best way to frame this to get people behind, at least maybe conservatives, which is his constituencies, to frame it as, hey, we're going to balance the budget and cut budget and pay off the debt type of thing. the thing that got me most interested, well, not interested, but that sparked my mind and started to think about it. Someone put it in a perspective. It's like, hey, if we sell this many acres, we have like 0.001% of the national debt, and it's like, okay, that's not even moving the needle, and that's a huge, asset to our country as Americans that we're liquidating for essentially no gain. So that to me was like, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's 2 weeks worth of interest payments.
Yeah, and again, that's like that helps a tiny bit right now, but then we pay the cost of losing those places forever. And like when the public land system was created, like what was Roosevelt talking about? What was Gifford Pinchot talking about? It was all about doing the greatest good for the greatest number for the longest period of time. It was about preserving and protecting these places for future generations. So yeah, 2 points to your question. Number one more follow-up on like the impact this has on like a budget perspective. If Mike Lee and some of his colleagues there in that committee were really worried about addressing like revenue deficiencies, they wouldn't be in one group saying, hey, we're going to sell off public lands to make some money because we need money to come in to deal with the deficit, right? But at the same time, in this very same bill, they also propose dramatically reducing royalties on gas and oil leases. So they're telling the gas and oil companies, hey, we don't want you to pay us as much money for the resources you're taking from these public lands. So quietly, they're giving this amazing subsidy to the gas and oil companies. I don't know why, but they're for some reason they don't care about making that money, which is very confusing to me and makes their whole what we're being told.
That's tough to reconcile. That's tough to reconcile.
Yeah. I have another Instagram post that I found, or I think it was actually on X originally, but just some conspiracy stuff to throw into the mix. It says Bill Gates is the largest private farmland owner in the United States. One of Mike Lee's biggest donors is Microsoft. Harlan Crow is a billionaire real estate developer. Harlan Crow is also one of Mike Lee's biggest donors. Blackstone Group is a private equity firm that invests in real estate. Blackstone is also one of Mike Lee's biggest donors. So seems like there's
who knows? I don't know if any of that's true.
Yeah.
But
whoever
seems
can
like there's
fact
more.
check if you
There's
want,
more
but
to this than what meets the eye, and there's some motivations there that are maybe not in the best interest of everybody. What
I can tell you is this, and I want to be careful with how I frame this because I want to be sensitive to like the religious aspects of this. I don't want to be overgeneralized here, but as I understand it, and again, I'm speaking like not having it 100% full context here. So if I misspeak, forgive me. But as I understand it, there is some historical antagonism from the Mormon community towards the federal government around, when the Mormon community moved to Utah and set up shop there, they really felt like the federal government was stealing their land when the rest of the settlers moved in and stuff happened. So it seems like there might be something tied to that in why some in that community and some in Utah and Senator Mike Lee have this really antagonistic view towards public lands and really strong negative feelings around having these places in the state of Utah. So,
I mean, we're kind of making pretty big assumptions here, but I would say it's fair to say that based on the evidence we have, there's something else going on here. I think that's fair to say,
especially considering the fact that Montana was exempt for whatever reason behind the scenes that we don't know about.
And so that's a whole nother interesting thing why Montana was exempt. If we want to get into that, we can get into that. But
how much time do we? Let's talk. Okay, so I think the thing that, and I just want to I want to get back to the slippery slope thing because I think that's the easiest way to understand why this is a problem. Because
before you go any further, we didn't even get to where things stand right now today. So at some point,
let's do that then. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so just within the last couple of days, this whole thing we've been discussing has had to change again for two reasons. One, there's been this enormous outcry, and then secondly, because of some rules that apply to the reconciliation process, the way that Mike Lee's proposal was written, it had to be changed. Because basically, I mentioned earlier, the special reconciliation process is supposed to be for budget reconciliation.
Right.
It's supposed to be revenues and expenses, you're not supposed to push a policy change through there.
Right.
Now, people do, but you're not supposed to. And so it goes through this thing called the bird rule test, or people call it the bird bath. And that's basically a process in place to try to cut out the most egregious examples of people pushing policy that doesn't directly tie to some kind of provable budget and revenues and expenses kind of impact. So the way the senator had it proposed the first time around did not pass that test. So because of that and the public outcry, he has now pulled that original version and submitted something new, which just came out late last night, early this morning. The newest version of the public land sale is still a bad deal. It, in this case now, is only applying to about 1.2 million acres of land, give or take, and just BLM lands now. So not U.S. Forest Service anymore. These are just Bureau of Land Management lands. But this is still mule deer wintering habitat, elk wintering habitat, antelope wintering habitat. The places a lot of folks have their shooting ranges where they go out and sight in their guns, local trails, different things like that. And then it's supposed to be just within 5 miles of a population center. But they don't define what a population center is. There's a whole bunch of very fuzzy language in this. But short answer, or kind of like the wrap-up of all of this, is that things have changed to be not quite as horrible as they were, but it's still really, really bad. It would be still the largest public land sale in modern history, and it's still, maybe most dangerous of all, establishes this new precedent for selling off public lands without any way of getting those funds back into the public land system. And as we start at the beginning, this absolutely is impacting 11 Western states today, but it just as likely 5 years from now, or 1 year from now, or 10 years from now could impact Michigan or Maine or Florida or wherever else you might be listening right now.
Yeah, I think that's from someone, I don't want anybody to lose their hunting spot or their hiking spot or whatever. I don't want wildlife to lose, mule deer to lose wintering range, all that stuff. It's a lot easier, though, for people that can relate it directly to them, right? Like, it's tough for some people. I understand. Like, somebody's in Vermont. It's like, I don't go out west. Well, what do I care, right? It's like, well, okay, you don't care. Maybe you don't care about Utah, but when it's in the Green Mountain National Forest, because, once again, slippery slope, the precedent has been set. We can sell these off easily now. We want to liquidate this. And next thing you know, that's going to become a whole, almost like, I'm sure people are going to lobby for that. Now, hey, I want you to sell off this 3,000 acres of the National Forest because I want to buy it and build a new ski resort, the biggest ski resort in the East, right? And so they're going to be going to the senator from Vermont, and that's going to be a thing now. And so it's going to be much easier for this to happen, and it's a snowball effect. And it's how we end up with some of the stuff in Washington that we all are like, this is way out of control. How did this happen? Well, this is how it happens. This is how it starts right here. And so we got to stop it before it starts. I think that's the important thing. And, the whole thing in my mind with, hey, we're going to do the 5 miles of a population center. It's like, okay, well, that's not that bad. It's just 5 miles. Okay, so sell that, build that up. And then in 10 years, hey, we're just going to do something 5 more miles. And it's like, and next thing you know, this population center is engulfed, 100,000 acres of whatever, and where do you stop it? Where do you can't stop it. So that's why I think it's super important, is to stop it before it starts and it gets out of control. And I don't see, other than, the process that you spoke on earlier seems fairly reasonable to me. This one does not. And it doesn't seem anywhere justified in my mind, really, for any reason. The other thing, talk about like financially, one of the best things you can do is invest in real estate and land, right? It's the most solid investment that appreciates. The American people hold this great, investment of wealth, and we're going to sell it off. That doesn't make any sense to me either. And so from a financial investment perspective, for me, I invest in land. Like that makes no sense to me either. Let's not sell this off. Let's keep it for us and hold on to it. It's a great source of value, and not just financially, of course. There's all the uses we, you and me and everybody else probably that's listening to this use it for. So there's many different reasons why this makes no sense, and we need to stop it.
Yeah, these public lands provide passive income, like literal passive income
Yep.
to our nation through, the managed, careful extraction of resources on many of these places, like oil and gas were appropriate,
Yep.
and logging and
Yep.
grazing and all these things that, we learned 150 years ago that you can't just have a free for all. You can't just have like
No.
the Wild West. When we did that back in the 1800s, we pretty much wiped everything off the face of the earth. I mean, we came this close to losing white-tailed deer. We came this close to losing elk and buffalo and our wide, clean ecosystems, right? We came very close. But we realized, like, at the last second, whoa, I guess we need some guardrails. I guess we need to be a little bit more careful here and try to have a slightly more sustainable plan of how we're going to do this. And so because of that, we have public lands. We have resource extraction that's done, it's not always perfect, but we have a system in place that works pretty decent at doing this in a moderate way that, maintains income streams while also maintaining the integrity of these places. You then also have what you just mentioned, which is the recreation economy. There's a $1.2 trillion annual economic impact from outdoor recreation in America, and the vast majority of that is dependent on these places. You then have just like the non-tangible but so important values that these places just provide us, with our lifestyles and the things we do. And then these places also provide ecosystem services. Like the reason the National Forest Service was originally created, like the first impetus, was protecting the headwaters of the water sources for all the major city centers across the nation. We had to protect where our water came from because they were cutting it all down, and these rivers were getting trashed, and huge runoff issues and flooding issues and burning issues. And we were realizing, we're not getting the drinking water we needed anymore. So they had to, start looking at the fact that these places provide our drinking water. They provide the clean air. They provide this wildly intricate, interconnected system of animals, plants, water that, give us places to hunt and fish, that give us animals, that give us everything that we kind of need to do what we do as human beings. That is, you can't put a price tag on all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a very long list of reasons that we could provide Senator Mike Lee for why these places are worth keeping around and why they're valuable, and an embarrassing short list of why his proposal makes sense.
Yeah, I would, and maybe you'd agree with me, Mark, but I would argue that like this tradition of public land ownership is like almost uniquely American and makes us it's like America. That's what in my mind, it's one of the cornerstones of our country.
Absolutely.
And it's like we don't want to get rid of that.
No, I mean, like if you consider yourself a patriot, like a red-blooded American, this is about as true American as it gets. Like it really was an idea that we started here and that has been exported to other places, but everyone looks at us as like the envy of the world when it comes to the public land system we have and everything it supports. So yeah, I mean, this is, so much of, I think, what also makes America unique and our culture unique is a little bit of that frontier culture, that the whittling, the sharpening of the axe that we achieved as a people as we, spread across this nation. And we were smart enough to preserve some of that. We preserved some of those wild places that made us who we are, because I think we as a people realize that if we lost that, who are we? And I think that's something that's important to remember today.
To contrast that too, I love looking at maps, right? Aerial photos. It's sometimes I'm on whatever app, or there's a million of them, but I'm looking at aerial photos, right? And I'm just going around. I love to go to different countries like Europe and Asia, and I just look, I'm like, man, this landscape is so different. And if you go to where not we all came from, but I guess we started, it's probably the United Kingdom, UK, England, and you look at that landscape, I don't think there's hardly any public land. There's no wildlife habitat. It's just all private land ownership, and there's nothing really wild about anything that I can see. Maybe there's a few exceptions, but you go on that and you look, and it's like, and it's almost sad to me. I'm like, and it just really opens your eyes to like how lucky we are to have what we have here. And they don't have any of that. It's just not there. And it's almost like disappointed. It's like, man, they have not. No, that's they don't even probably realize what they're missing, but they don't have any of that.
Well, and because of that, they don't have nearly the culture of hunting and fishing
Right.
that we do, because they just don't have, like, average normal people don't have places to do this like we do. Sure, there's some exceptions, but nothing like we have here.
No.
And so, yeah, we've got it really good. And I took it for granted for a really long time. I didn't realize it, and I think most people don't realize it, but maybe the silver lining of everything that's happening right now is that it is bringing some of this to the attention of more people.
Yeah, I think so. So I have a question. Well, two things I think that's important to touch upon is I would say that a lot of the hunting community, not all of them, are fairly conservative. I would say probably the majority are conservative. I wouldn't want to speak for everybody, okay? And obviously this is a conservative or a Republican at least. Honestly, I don't really know Mike Lee's politics outside of this, so I don't know what he is. So I know he's a registered Republican senator. So I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of resistance when you have that pushback, right? And then the second thing is, obviously, I think there's a lot of Trump supporters that are on that side of the aisle too, and that are in our community. Do you know if the president supports this aspect of the reconciliation bill or not? Has he spoke on that? Has there been any feedback, or is this like a Mike Lee thing?
There's not been any pushback from him on this.
Okay.
I think there's just so much other stuff going on. In the past, he has made, statements like, I support public lands. I would never support a sale of public lands. I think that's coming from it seemed like, from what I've heard, that's coming from like someone saying, hey, say this, But I do know that the hunting and fishing base constituency is an important voting base for the president, right? So
he knows that.
I sure hope
His
he
son
knows
knows
that.
right?
Yeah, his son knows
Yeah.
that. He's a part of that.
So-
So you would hope that this is something that might, get some pushback there. But at the same time, like, also being like clear-eyed, there's so many other priorities,
Right.
at play too, that
Yeah. I just don't. I think that as, like, for me, speaking for myself, as I'm registered independent, but I would say I lean on the conservative side. I don't think you have to feel like you're going against your principles and values by voting, or not voting, but disagreeing with this aspect of what a Republican or a conservative is pushing for. That's okay. And people that just love Trump, and that's great. I think he's doing a lot of good things. It's not like you're going against Trump either. So I think that it's okay to disagree with this and to be vocal about it. It doesn't mean that you aren't what you thought you were type of situation. So I just want to touch on that, because that is something that I think a lot of people feel, and I don't know if it's really being vocalized. Maybe it is a little bit, but you can still support Trump, believe in what he's doing, but oppose this. That's okay. You don't have to be
Yeah, I think
just right in line with everyone. And maybe you're not even opposing Trump on this. Maybe if he had the time to focus and wasn't worried about what Iran and Israel were doing, he would have more focus on this. And I'm sure that his son understands, I would hope, the importance of this. And he's probably in his ear too, as much as he can be. So
I think about a family, right? In my family, let's say I've got a brother, and one person might say, well, if your brother's doing something that you think is a bad idea, maybe it would hurt his feelings if I said something to him, or maybe that would be offensive if I said, hey, I'm concerned about what you're doing. I don't think it's good for your future. I don't think it's good for our family. Is that the right way to go? Or is the best brotherly thing you can do, is the best way to serve your family, to actually talk to your brother about this thing? Say, hey, this is very concerning. This is not good for our family. This is not good for you. Here's why I'm worried about it. I think that is the better way to operate within a family, to have open communication, right? So you could think about this in that kind of way. If you are a diehard Trump supporter or a diehard Republican, and I understand how that can feel like there's some uncomfortableness with in some way opposing your team, right? I'm a big Michigan State basketball fan, And if ever, Michigan State does something I don't agree with or I'm not happy about, it pains me a little bit to have to be like, oh, that sucks, right? I don't want to. I want to just support them.
Yeah.
But in this case, like if you want the best thing for the Republican Party, if you want the best thing for Donald Trump's presidency, it would be making sure they understand that this is a losing issue. Making sure that they understand, like, hey, man, this is not representing your constituency well. This is not going to help you guys win future elections. So that's a whole nother reason why I think that it would like serve Republicans well to like get this stuff off the Republican platform, get this stuff out of the party. I would love for Republicans to be able to win on public land issues. Right now, Democrats are winning a lot of that side of the stuff. They've been pretty good with public lands. They've been pretty good with the environment. And unfortunately, Republicans haven't. I don't want this to be a partisan thing. I think it's great if both Republicans and Democrats are like, hey, this is important stuff. Let's debate how to do it. But not like one wants to get rid of them and one wants to keep them around. So
yeah, that was kind of my point of bringing it up. It's like it doesn't have to be a partisan thing. It's okay. Because honestly, like every time there's something like this that I see, I always sit there and I'm like, okay, and I think about it, and I kind of sit back and watch it, and I'm like, once again, I think they got this one wrong. I don't think, and that's okay. Like, that doesn't mean that you're like a traitor, treasonous. So I wanted to vocalize that to everybody it's okay.
It's really important. It's really important. And it also, like, not only is it going to help, whatever the issue is, if the person you voted for is doing something that you don't think is going to help the cause in the long run, another thing to remind yourself of is that your voice, so let's say like a Republican voter right now, their voice is actually more valuable than anybody else's because it's the Republicans who are pushing this, right? Mm-hmm. They already know, like, they're not going to win over any Democrats in the future, right? So all they really care about doing, and this goes for like Democrats with their base too, but like a Republican senator right now cares about making sure that the Republican base is happy with what they're doing and trying to win some independents, right? So if let's say I'm an independent and I call Mike Lee and I say, hey, this concerns me, he's going to be interested in that because like that's a possible voter for him someday. And then if I'm a Republican and I call Mike Lee and I'm saying, hey, I'm a Republican, I'm in your party, I have supported you in the past, but this is like a deal breaker for me, he's really going to listen because this is a person that could make or break his future career, right? Mm-hmm. So same thing goes for any other state or any other politician. It's like Republicans hunters and anglers have a superpower right now because like we're within the base of the party that's pushing this bad idea. So they're more willing to listen to us than like traditional environmentalists or something, right? They're not going to listen. But us, we're the people that should be supporting them. And if the people that should be supporting them are mad at them, that's a red flag.
Yep. That's perfect. So I guess let's get to really the important part now, is what we can do. And, you can call, you can email. The question I had, and I called and emailed Mike Lee today, I was looking at some of the options, and both of our senators are Democrats that don't support this at all. And I'll ask you, because this is my thought today. I'm like, I don't know if my call is very useful or has much utility going to them if they're already not supporting it. Should I just go right to Mike Lee because I feel like I'm going to have a bigger impact, him hearing from us, and I don't have to say what state I'm from, right?
I had the same
dilemma, and I don't know, maybe other people are thinking the same thing because there's a lot of the Northeast states that are, pretty blue, and they probably don't support this bill to begin with. So is there any utility in reaching out to a senator that's a Democrat and is already not going to vote for this bill, period, no matter what's in it?
So yes, to a couple different things there. Number one, even if your senators are already against this, it's still worth calling them because what it does is, like, I think every elected official has either like internal or maybe even an external like ranking of issues. Like imagine like one of my senators, Senator Peters from Michigan, probably has either a real list somewhere or in his head a list of like the important issues to his constituency, to his state, what matters to his state. And if public lands and the environment and wildlife are like at the bottom of the list, he's not going to be thinking a lot about it in the future, or like be looking at that as an important thing to advocate for within the halls of Congress. If on the flip side, even if like Peters is an automatic no on this because he's a Democrat, right? But if he's a Democrat, he's already an automatic no. But he's also gotten phone calls from 50,000 people today, all saying this is a huge issue. All of a sudden, he's going to think, okay, well, this is a winning issue for me. If I can maybe do a little bit of horse trading or do a little pushing or really prod some people internally here to try to cash in on a favor or grease a few palms here or do something to try to help here, because then he can come back and say, hey, you know what? I was involved in getting that thing nixed. I helped on that. Or in the future, he can speak to the impact he made or whatever it might be. So it still matters. And then also it's going to matter in the future. So I want to make sure that when the next iteration of this comes back, or, maybe 4 years, 8 years from now, maybe there's Democrats in control of Congress. Yeah. And instead of selling off public lands, maybe they're trying to put 5 million acres of solar panels on. And we're saying, well, geez, that's destroying wildlife habitat. That's bad for our public lands too. I want him to remember that public lands aren't a number 50 issue, but they're like a number 7 issue. So like we're also playing the long-term game here. And then to the other thing, if your senator is a Republican, it's critically important to reach out. If you are wanting to do like an above and beyond thing, call Mike Lee's office, leave him a message. You're not a resident of his state, so like if a resident of the state gets 10 points of value, a non-resident maybe has 5 points of value. But we're going to make him, I sure think he's feeling it today. I think that over the last couple of weeks, he is hopefully coming to a realization. This is wildly unpopular. Like 7-8 years ago, a guy named Jason Chavez. Do you remember him? He was Jason Chavez. He was out of Utah again. And he proposed a sale of 3 million acres of public land back then. This was like 2016 or 17 or something. And that was like the first time we had something like what's going on right now happen. There was a huge public outcry. All of us in this world were talking, but like Joe Rogan came out about it and all this kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah. So it was like a similar thing to right now. And the pushback and the pressure was so enormous on him that not only did he pull the thing back, not only did he post a picture like of him and a hunting dog saying like, I hear you guys, I'm a hunter too, I won't do this anymore. He lost all of his political capital and he resigned shortly thereafter. He didn't run for re-election. He's out of the political system. So, we can put pressure on people. We can eliminate people's, or at least significantly challenge people's future political prospects if we're willing to really let them have it.
And we can make it an issue that they know in 5 years, oh no, we're not touching that. Nope, no way, we're not touching that. We know what happened. Nope, we're not going anywhere near that one. That's probably the important part for the long game. Is having an issue that everybody, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, says that's a non-starter for us. Like, I'm not going anywhere near.
So what I've done is I've called my 2 senators who are Democrats. So again, same situation, but I called them. I called my representative because if this passes the Senate, it goes back to the House kind of. There's like a little bit of reconciling. We use that word a lot today, but the House and the Senate have to look at any differences between the 2 versions of the bill, and there's like a little bit of work that's done there. And so our representatives still have a little bit of say before this goes to the president. So I called my representative, who is a Republican and who was on that original committee that approved the House version. So I've had a lot of chats with those guys. So I called them again and said, hey, if this makes it back to you, please remember what we talked about last time and what hundreds of thousands of other people talked about. I called Mike Lee's office. And then I also called the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune. He's out of South Dakota. And so he's kind of, trying to wrangle all the cats on the Republican side of the aisle right now to get this thing through.
Right.
And if enough people call his office and he sees the same thing you described, like, holy smokes, everyone's mad at us about this. They want this bill to pass with all the other stuff in it. Most people don't care about the public land thing. At least most of these senators don't care about this the way Mike Lee cares about it. So if they realize how politically unpopular this is, right, and then it might, screw their big, beautiful bill, there's a chance that he might just be like, hey, we got to just get this thing out, Mike. It's not worth it. And that might be a way to leverage too. So those are the things. And emails are great, but a phone call is the very best.
Yeah.
And it's super easy. I mean, you
Yeah,
experienced it. It's not, years ago, I thought it was kind of like a scary idea to call a senator's office. It was like a little bit intimidating.
And by the way, Mike Lee's probably not going to pick up the phone, everybody. Just an FYI. You don't have to actually debate Mike Lee about a policy issue on the phone. That's not what's going to happen. So,
But at one point I was like, is there going to be someone who's going to like challenge me on what I say or like debate me? But no, you either get a voicemail or you get some lowly intern who, is having a horrible day hearing from tens of thousands of other people like us who aren't happy with what's happening. So you don't need to be intimidated at all. You know, go in there with a simple one or two things you want to explain. And it's easy, but it makes a difference. Like we are making a difference on this, and there's a chance that we could get this thing pulled. It's already been changed, and I think it's as we mentioned a few minutes ago, like the silver lining of this whole storm of like it's the whole debacle. The silver lining is that his once again showcased that one, our voices matter. Two, when we as like a outdoor community come together on something, like whether it's hunters and anglers or like the Cabela's crowd and the REI crowd, or whether it's like the right side of the aisle and the left side of the aisle, like when we're willing to put aside whatever differences it is and say like, man, you kayak, I hunt, or you live in, Burlington, Vermont, and I live in the Adirondacks, whatever. Like, let's set aside that stuff. We all care about these places. We want to be able to have at least a few places in this country left that aren't paved over. Let's work together on this. And when we do that, it can break through the noise. It can make a difference. I think that's one of the things we're seeing here.
So as far as a priority list, how would you, so we can, and we'll put links to this in this video and probably on all the platforms so people have a number. If you haven't seen it already,
we can throw them in the description of the notes depending on the platform.
Yeah, we'll throw them up anyway. But would you say number one is your senator? Or why don't you tell us the top, like what's the top priority list? If you had to make one call, who is it? And then if you're making all the calls, go down the list.
So the one thing to take note of is that this is changing rapidly, right? So, depends on when you guys publish this podcast. It could be different. But as of right now, the number one thing would be to call your two senators. Like whatever your two state senators are, call them. Let them know that you would appreciate them opposing any sale of public lands in this reconciliation bill. That's number one. Number two would be to call your representative. You're going to have one district representative. Call that person. Tell them the same thing. Say, hey, if this reconciliation bill comes back to you with a public land sale component, gotta get rid of it. In any of these phone calls, it's also useful to explain like, hey, I'm from X state, or I'm this resident, or I'm a registered Republican. I voted for you. I appreciate you, but this is a big issue. Or maybe, hey, I'm an independent. I didn't vote for you, but if you could do right by me on this, I'd be more inclined to consider you next time around. Share why this matters to you briefly. I always lead like, I'm a hunter. I'm an angler. My family's life revolves around this stuff. Anything like that is a useful bit of context. But do those two things. Number one, your two senators, and then your rep. If you've got more additional time, that's when we're talking about making Mike Lee's life a little bit more difficult right now, and then calling the majority leader, John Thune, the senator out of South Dakota. And what I would recommend to people is, whenever you're listening to this, try to check in on where the process stands right now. Because, if you listen to this like a week from now, it might be different. Maybe it's already to the House, or maybe the language changed again. There's a bunch of different people that are sharing stuff about this. At Meat Eater, we're trying to keep articles updated on it. I know Field and Stream's done a great job. Outdoor Life's done a great job. Most conservation organizations are now having action alerts around this. I think Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has done a particularly good job of keeping things updated and having an action center where you just go to their website, click take action on this, and then there's a way to send like an auto-created email that you can just edit and change however you want, but there's like the basic gist of stuff in the email, and or the phone numbers for who to call and how to do all this stuff. So that would be one place to go. Geez, sorry. I'm going to give you a phone number here in a second. The one thing with like checking in with a BHA or someone else is that they would be able to tell you like, hey, this is still in the Senate, or now this is back to the House, or now it's heading to the president's desk and we all need to email the executive and the executive arm of the government and try to get them to nix it somehow.
Well, I guess the best thing would be is try to keep up with some of these pages and pay attention to what's going on. Really, on social media is the best way, and you can probably find up-to-date stuff. Spreads immediately and fast on social media. So, maybe it's not always your best resource for information, but it may be in this instance.
Yeah, at least fact check it. Social is a good place to start, and then fact check. So I want to give a phone number here that takes you to the U.S. Capitol switchboard. So, if you don't want to go searching for your senator's contact info, or maybe you don't even know who your senator is off the top of your head, there's an easy way to do it. You just call this one number, and then it takes you, sometimes it'll be like a computer, sometimes it'll be a real person, and it'll either say like, hey, what state do you live in? And then, okay, here's your 2 senators. Which one do you want to talk to? And then it will just forward you to that office. Or if you know who it is, you'll just say, hey, take me to Senator Mike Lee, or take me to whoever. So the number is this. It's 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. And that'll get you to whichever office you need. Same for senators or representatives. Either one you can access through that number.
Good deal. Call. Call. Do you have anything else you want to close with, or that you think's particularly important on this that maybe we haven't touched on? I know we're got just a minute here, but
I'd say the only thing I would just encourage folks to do is to stay, up on this stuff moving forward. This thing's gonna come to a head one way or another here in the next week or two, but there's gonna be some next thing. There's always some next thing when it comes to public lands or wildlife. So try to stay tapped in, try to pay attention, whether that's by joining a conservation organization or just, reading the conservation articles that come out from the magazines or the websites. Listen to the podcasts that talk about this stuff. I know it's not as exciting as learning how to track a big buck in the snow or whatever the thing is of the moment, but this is the stuff that allows us to have those really great times out there. So stay, try to stay informed, and never ever forget that your voice matters. This is part of being a hunter and angler, is also being an advocate.
Yep. And if nothing else, I'm optimistic that this is gonna, solidify the fact that we do have a big voice and we do have power if we come together and we're vocal. I think our biggest flaw is that we're not very vocal. If we are vocal, we can kill this bill, and we can kill future legislation that is, threatens what we do. So hopefully this is just the beginning for, I won't say just the beginning. There's been many people that have done a great job over the years, but it seems like to me this is one of the biggest uprisings that I'm aware of. So let's keep that momentum and that power and that attitude, and be watchful and vigilant of what is going through, these legislative sessions in the future. And because it may be public lands, or maybe something else in the future that's related to public lands, or anything else that we need to come together on again. So let's use as an example. Hey, we are powerful if we come together. We do have a voice, and they will hear us.
I 100% agree.
Cool. Thank you, Mark.
Hey, my pleasure.
Appreciate you coming on. All right, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Make your phone calls. Let's come together on this. Let's get it out of the budget reconciliation bill, and let's have public lands to enjoy for us and our children.